The underestimated threat, the crystalline conference hall of the Galactic Trade Federation, buzzed with the sound of a dozen different species conducting business. High Chancellor Vex, a towering Altarian whose blue skin shimmered with embedded light patterns, called the weekly assessment meeting to order. His forearms gestured gracefully as holographic displays materialized around the circular chamber. Item 47 on today's agenda, Vex announced, his voice carrying the melodic undertones typical of his species. The human colony worlds and their defensive capabilities. A collective ripple of amusement passed through the assembled delegates. The humans had been in space for barely 8 decades, a blink of an eye compared to the millennial civilizations represented in this room. Trade Supervisor Quinn, a insectoid Vorthin, whose compound eyes reflected the chamber's ambient light, clicked her mandibles dismissively. The primitives are still using kinetic weapons. Our intelligence reports indicate they've developed something they call magnetic accelerator cannons. Essentially, they're throwing metal at relativistic speeds. The chamber erupted in harmonious laughter. Ambassador Krell9 of the Zephyrian Empire. His serpentine form coiled elegantly around his floating platform, spoke with barely concealed mirth. Kinetic weapons. In this age of plasma shields and energy dampeners, it's almost charming in its simplicity. The specifications are rather impressive for such primitive technology, admitted Dr. Zaraprime, the Federation's chief scientific advisor. Her translucent Etherian form flickered with concern. They claim to achieve velocities approaching 15% of light speed with solid projectiles. Irrelevant, Vex waved dismissively. Any civilized defense system includes plasma barriers that can dissipate kinetic energy. The humans are simply compensating for their lack of sophisticated energy manipulation technology. File it under primitive curiosities and move on. Meanwhile, 3,000 light-years away in the Terran colonial sector, Commander Alina Vasquez stood on the observation deck of Defense Station Omega, orbiting the agricultural world of New Ankara. The station's massive bulk bristled with humanity's latest defensive innovation, though the galaxy's powers had no idea what they were truly looking at. Alina was a product of Earth's military academies, but her genius lay in practical engineering rather than grand strategy. She had grown up in the asteroid mining colonies, where her father taught her that physics didn't care about your intentions, only your calculations. Now, at 35, she commanded humanity's most advanced defensive installation. Status report. Lieutenant Chen, Alina requested. Her dark eyes focused on the tactical displays, showing ship movements at the system's edge. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a young officer whose family had fled Earth during the population crisis, looked up from her, consul with evident concern. Commander, we're detecting massive hyperspace signatures. At least 40 ships, possibly more. Configuration matches Zephyrian Empire battle formations. Alina felt her stomach tighten. The Zephyrians had been pressuring human colonies for months, demanding tribute and threatening invasion. Diplomatic protests to the Galactic Federation had been met with patronizing dismissals. Humanity was too young, too primitive to warrant serious consideration in galactic politics. Time to intercept. Alina asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what was approaching. 14 hours at current approach vector, Chen replied. Commander, their flagship alone outmasses our entire defense grid by a factor of 10. Alina smiled grimly. Mass was exactly what the aliens didn't understand about human warfare. Lieutenant, charge all magnetic accelerator batteries. Load tungsten carbide penetrator rounds. and patch me through to Admiral Morrison at Terra Command. The holographic image of Admiral James Morrison flickered to life above Elena's command console. The old warrior's weathered face showed the strain of coordinating humanity's desperate defensive preparations across dozens of colony worlds. "Elena, I assume you've detected our incoming visitors," Morrison said without preamble. "Intelligence suggests this is a full conquest fleet. The Zephyrians have decided that human space is too valuable to remain independent. Admiral, our defensive calculations show positive engagement probability," Elena reported. "The magnetic accelerators are performing beyond specifications. We can achieve projectile velocities of 0.17 c with the new focusing arrays." Morrison's expression remained skeptical. "Elena, I admire your confidence, but we're facing technology that's thousands of years ahead of ours. Their shields can handle direct nuclear strikes. With respect, sir, their shields are designed for energy weapons, plasma, particle beams, directed electromagnetic pulses. They dissipate energy across electromagnetic spectrum frequencies." Elena's voice carried the certainty of someone who had run the calculations countless times. "But kinetic energy doesn't have a frequency. It's just mass times velocity squared divided by 2. Physics doesn't negotiate." 12 hours later, the Zephyrian conquest fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the new Ancora system. Ambassador Krell 9 had personally chosen to lead this expedition, seeing it as an opportunity to demonstrate Zephyrian superiority to the watching galaxy. His flagship, the Cosmic Dominion, stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull gleamed with adaptive armor that could reconfigure itself to optimize against different weapon types. The ship's plasma shields generated enough energy to power a small star, and its weapons could reduce planets to molten slag. "Scan the system," Krell 9 commanded from his elevated command throne. "I want a full tactical assessment of human defensive capabilities." His tactical officer, a young Zephyrian named Sasha 7, worked efficiently at his station. "Sir, detecting one major defensive installation orbiting the primary colony world, approximately 50 smaller vessels in supporting positions. Mass readings suggest primitive construction, likely metal alloys rather than smart matter. Weapons." "Analysis?" Krell 9 inquired, though he expected nothing that could threaten his fleet. "Unusual energy signatures, sir. They appear to be generating massive electromagnetic fields, but not in patterns consistent with known weapon systems. The power output is ... significant." Krell 9's forked tongue flicked out in amusement. "Primitive magnetic technology. They're probably trying to intimidate us with industrial mining equipment. Signal the fleet to advance in standard intimidation formation. Let's give these humans a demonstration of real power." As the Zephyrian fleet began its stately advance toward New Anchora's orbital space, Elena watched from Defense Station Omega's command center. Every screen showed targeting solutions, power readings, and trajectory calculations that would have been impossible to compute without humanity's most advanced quantum processors. "All stations report ready, Commander," Lieutenant Chen announced. "Magnetic accelerator batteries have achieved optimal charge. Projectile loading complete." Elena studied the approaching fleet with the cold calculation her father had taught her in the asteroid mines. The Zephyrians were maintaining tight formation, probably to maximize their shield overlap and present a unified, intimidating presence. It was exactly what human tactical doctrine had hoped they would do. "Target the flagship," Elena ordered. "Single projectile, maximum velocity." Let's see if their shields can handle 16% of light speed. The magnetic accelerator cannon. That fired was humanity's masterpiece of practical engineering. Rather than trying to match alien energy manipulation technology, human scientists had focused on the one thing they understood better than anyone else in the galaxy: how to make things go very, very fast. The tungsten carbide penetrator rod measured 3 meters long and massed exactly 2.7 tons. It contained no explosives, no sophisticated guidance systems, no exotic materials. It was simply the hardest, densest projectile human metallurgy could produce, accelerated by magnetic fields that drew power from an entire fusion reactor. When the rod left the cannon at 0.16 C, it carried the kinetic energy equivalent of a 50 megaton nuclear weapon. But unlike a nuclear explosion, which released its energy as heat and radiation that shields could dissipate, this was pure kinetic force focused into a projectile smaller than a telephone pole. Asterisk. The Cosmic Dominion's automated defense systems detected the incoming projectile 0.3 seconds before impact. Warning klaxons shrieked throughout the ship as tactical computers struggled to classify the threat. The plasma shields, designed to dissipate energy weapons, attempted to engage the projectile. Physics cared nothing for Zephyrian engineering specifications. The tungsten rod struck the flagship's bow section at 16% of light speed. The impact created a brief, brilliant flash, as the projectile's kinetic energy converted to heat and plasma. The rod punched through the ship's adaptive armor like it was tissue paper, the plasma shields offering no more resistance than morning mist. The projectile carved a perfectly straight tunnel through 17 decks, vaporizing everything in its path: structural supports, bulkheads, equipment, and crew members simply ceased to exist as the rod's passage created a column of superheated plasma. The rod exited through the ship's stern section and continued on its trajectory, striking the heavy cruiser in formation behind the flagship. Ambassador Krell 9 was thrown from his command throne as his flagship's superstructure buckled around the massive wound. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as atmosphere vented through the tunnel that now ran the length of his ship. Damage report. He screamed over the chaos of alarms and emergency announcements. Sasha 7's voice cracked with shock as he read his instruments. Sir, we've lost 17 decks. The projectile passed completely through the ship. Structural integrity is compromised. The stellar crusher behind us has been crippled by the same projectile. That's impossible, Krell 9 hissed. Our shields can deflect antimatter weapons. How can a simple kinetic projectile? His question was interrupted by the tactical display, showing dozens of new energy signatures from the human defensive positions. Every magnetic accelerator cannon in the system was charging for a coordinated volley. Sir, Sash 7 whispered, his voice filled with dawning horror. The energy readings from their weapons, they're not just throwing metal, they're accelerating projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Our shields can't dissipate kinetic energy. They're useless against solid matter moving that fast. Alina watched the Zephyrian fleet's formation begin to waver as their tactical doctrine crumbled. For the first time in galactic history, energy shields meant nothing. Centuries of military doctrine based on energy weapon supremacy were obsolete. In the face of physics that every human physics student learned in their first semester, "Fire all batteries," Alina commanded. "Concentrated barrage on the largest vessels. Show them what happens when an unstoppable force meets a movable object." 47 magnetic accelerator cannons fired simultaneously, the tungsten pen, each carrying the destructive force of a strategic nuclear weapon. crossed the space between defenders and attackers in less than 2 seconds. The Zephyrian fleet, designed to fight energy-based battles with shield walls and formation tactics, had no defense against weapons that simply ignored their most sophisticated technology. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds, crumpled like aluminum cans. The projectiles didn't just punch through. They created cascade failures as their passage destabilized structural integrity throughout entire vessels. Secondary explosions rippled through the fleet as ships collided with debris moving at significant fractions of light speed. Ambassador Kralnine watched in stunned silence as his unstoppable conquest fleet was systematically dismantled by weapons that any first-year physics student could understand. The humans hadn't tried to match alien technology. They had simply made Newton's laws of motion into the deadliest force in space. "Retreat," he whispered, then screamed it as another volley began charging. "All ships, emergency hyperspace jump. Retreat immediately." The surviving Zephyrian vessels, less than half the original fleet, vanished into hyperspace carrying impossible news back to their empire. For the first time in galactic history, a primitive species had decisively defeated an advanced military force. Elena stood in the sudden quiet of her command center, watching debris clouds expand where the Zephyrian fleet had been. Her tactical displays showed complete victory, but she felt no satisfaction. This was just the beginning. "Lieutenant Chen," she said quietly, "send a message to all human colonies. Tell them to prepare for escalation. When the galaxy realizes what happened here, they're not going to react with respect. They're going to react with fear." The galaxy learns to fear physics. The emergency session of the Galactic Trade Federation convened 18 hours after the first reports from the new Ankara system reached civilized space. The crystalline conference hall, normally a place of orderly diplomatic discourse, buzzed with panic and confusion as representatives from 47 species demanded explanations. For the impossible, High Chancellor Vex's light patterns flickered with agitation as he called for order. The holographic displays surrounding the chamber showed debris analysis, energy readings, and tactical reconstructions that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. "The reports cannot be accurate," declared Trade Supervisor Quinn, her mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. "No kinetic weapon can penetrate modern shield technology. It's physically impossible." Dr. Zara Prime materialized more solidly than usual, her Etherian form stabilizing as she focused on the crisis. "I've analyzed the debris patterns and energy signatures. The humans are accelerating solid projectiles to velocities approaching 20% of light speed. At those speeds, kinetic energy becomes devastating regardless of target defenses. You're suggesting these primitives have weaponized basic physics?" Ambassador Vex of the Vorlian Confederacy spoke through his translation device, his crystalline form resonating with disbelief. "Any species capable of such engineering would have developed proper energy weapons millennia ago." "That's exactly the point," Dr. Zara Prime replied, her form flickering with emphasis. "Every species in this federation developed energy manipulation technology early in their advancement. We learned to work with plasma, antimatter, exotic particles. The humans took a different path. They perfected the manipulation of matter and motion." The chamber fell into troubled silence as the implications sank in. For thousands of years, galactic civilization had been based on the assumption that advanced meant energy-based. Plasma shields, particle beam weapons, antimatter explosives. The entire military doctrine of every major power was built around energy weapon supremacy. Meanwhile, in the Terran home system, Admiral Morrison stood before the Emergency Defense Council in Geneva. The assembled representatives of humanity's colonies and Earth's governments listened with growing amazement as Morrison detailed the new Ankara victory. Commander Vasquez's defensive action proved what our theoretical physicists have been calculating for months, Morrison explained, gesturing to holographic displays showing weapon performance data. Electromagnetic field manipulation allows us to accelerate projectiles to velocities where kinetic energy becomes competitive with antimatter weapons. President Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Authority asked the question everyone was thinking. Admiral, what's our strategic position if other alien powers decide to test us? Morrison's expression grew grim. Madam President, our intelligence indicates at least 6 major powers are mobilizing fleets. The Altarian hegemony alone is assembling over 300 ships. They believe the Zephyrian defeat was an anomaly, possibly caused by defective equipment or tactical errors. Dr. Marcus Webb, humanity's leading theoretical physicist and architect of the Magnetic Accelerator program, stepped forward. If I may, Admiral, the aliens' response is predictable from a psychological perspective. They cannot accept that their fundamental assumptions about warfare are wrong. They'll escalate until forced to confront reality. And what reality is that, Doctor? Asked President Chen. That in space combat, Sir Isaac Newton is the deadliest force in the universe, Webb replied with academic precision. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. When you accelerate 2.5 tons of tungsten to 16% of light speed, the reaction is catastrophic for anything in its path. 3 days after the new Ankara incident, unexpected source, the Crystallian Protectorate, a relatively minor power known for their crystal-based technology, dispatched a scientific expedition to observe human defensive capabilities. First-hand Commander Elena Vasquez, now commanding all human defensive installations in the outer colonies, watched the approaching Crystallian fleet with calm professionalism. Intelligence reports indicated 57 ships, including their newest experimental vessel equipped with regenerative crystal armor. They're treating this as a scientific experiment, Elena told her expanded command staff. They want to test whether kinetic weapons can overcome their specific defensive technology. Lieutenant Chen, now promoted to tactical coordinator, studied the approach vectors with growing concern. Commander, their formation suggests they're planning to engage at close range, much closer than the Zephyrians attempted. They're trying to minimize our projectile velocity advantage, Elena realized. At close range, they think their armor can absorb kinetic impacts without catastrophic damage. Dr. Webb's voice came through the communication system from his laboratory. On Earth, Elena, I've run preliminary calculations on crystalline crystal armor. Their technology allows rapid self-repair and energy distribution. Against energy weapons, it's nearly invulnerable. And against kinetic weapons, Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Crystal structures are extremely strong in some directions, but they have specific fracture planes. A high-velocity impact along the right vector will cause cascade failures throughout their entire armor matrix. Elena smiled grimly. Thank you, Dr. Lieutenant Chen. Prepare for close-range engagement. Load armor-piercing penetrators, and calculate optimal impact angles for crystal lattice disruption. The Crystallian fleet approached to within 50,000 kilometers before opening communication channels. Admiral Vexnine, speaking through universal translators, addressed the human defensive positions with academic politeness. Humans of the new Ankara system, we come in the interest of scientific inquiry. Our governments wish to understand your weapon systems to prevent future misunderstandings. Will you demonstrate your kinetic acceleration capabilities against our defensive matrix? Alina found herself impressed by their directness. Unlike the Zephyrians' arrogant dismissal or the Federation's bureaucratic contempt, the Crystallians were approaching this as a genuine scientific problem. Crystallian fleet, we appreciate your scientific approach, Alina responded. However, demonstration of our weapons at this range will result in the destruction of your vessels. We recommend you withdraw to a safer distance. We understand the risks, Admiral Vex-9 replied. Our crystal armor has been specifically designed to test kinetic resistance. We must know if our defenses require fundamental redesign. Alina felt a moment of sympathy for scientists whose experimental curiosity might cost them their lives. Very well. We'll begin with a single projectile at reduced velocity. Target your smallest escort vessel. The magnetic accelerator fired. At 60% power, accelerating a tungsten penetrator to approximately 10% of light speed. At that velocity, the projectile carried the kinetic energy of a tactical nuclear weapon. But Alina hoped it might be survivable if the technology worked as advertised. The rods struck the escort vessel's crystal armor matrix with brilliant precision. For a brief moment, the armor held, distributing the impact energy throughout its crystalline structure exactly as designed. Then physics asserted itself. The kinetic energy created fracture lines that propagated through the crystal matrix faster than the armor's repair. Systems could compensate. The entire vessel's outer hull shattered like a wine glass, exposing the interior to vacuum and debris. The ship didn't explode. It simply came apart as its structural integrity collapsed. Admiral Vex-9's voice came through the communication channel, filled with awe rather than anger. Fascinating. The impact energy exceeded our matrix's ability to distribute the force. The kinetic transfer was too rapid for our repair systems. Admiral Alina replied carefully, "We can provide detailed physics calculations if your scientists are interested. But please, withdraw your fleet before we're forced to demonstrate maximum power impacts." Understood, humans. We have learned what we came to learn. Our fleets will withdraw, and our governments will reconsider their strategic assumptions. As the Crystallian fleet departed, Alina felt a moment of hope. Perhaps rational discourse could prevent the devastating conflict that seemed inevitable. That hope died 2 weeks later when the combined fleets of 4 major galactic powers assembled at the edge of human space. The Altarian hegemony, the Vorlian Confederacy, the Etherian Collective, and the reformed Zephyrian Empire had set aside centuries of rivalry to address what they now saw as an existential threat to galactic civilization. If kinetic weapons could neutralize advanced defenses, the entire balance of power was meaningless. Admiral Morrison stood in the Strategic Command Center beneath Luna's surface, watching sensor displays that showed the largest hostile fleet in recorded galactic history, over 800 ships representing the combined military might of civilizations that had conquered galaxies. "Admiral," reported Captain Jackson, Humanity's intelligence coordinator, "they're demanding unconditional surrender and complete disarmament of all kinetic acceleration systems. They're giving us 72 hours to comply." Morrison studied the tactical displays with the calm professionalism that had seen him through dozens of desperate battles. "Captain, what's the status of the Darwin project?" Dr. Webb reports. "All systems operational, sir. The mass drivers are charged and ready." Dr. Webb joined the conversation from his secure laboratory. "Admiral, I want to emphasize that this demonstration will fundamentally alter the strategic balance of galactic civilization. Once we reveal the full capability of our technology, there's no going back. Doctor, they've given us no choice, Morrison replied. 800 ships against our 57 defensive installations. If we don't demonstrate overwhelming deterrent capability, they'll destroy every human colony in space. The Darwin Project was humanity's ultimate expression of kinetic weapon philosophy. Instead of ship-mounted magnetic accelerators, human engineers had constructed massive installations throughout the solar system. Each device could accelerate projectiles to 25% of light speed, carrying kinetic energy equivalent to antimatter weapons. But the true genius of the Darwin Project wasn't the individual weapons. It was the targeting system that could coordinate simultaneous strikes across interstellar distances. And the projectiles themselves, not simple tungsten rods, but smart matter that could adjust its trajectory and multiply its destructive potential. When the alien ultimatum expired, Morrison gave the order that would echo through galactic history. All Darwin stations, fire for effect. Operation Physics Lesson is authorized. Across human space, 47 mass driver installations fired simultaneously. The projectiles, each massing 50 tons and accelerated to 1/4 light speed, carried the destructive force of strategic antimatter weapons. But unlike antimatter, they couldn't be detected until impact, couldn't be deflected by energy shields, and couldn't be intercepted by point defense systems. The combined alien fleet, arranged in the traditional formation that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia, had no defense against weapons that ignored every advancement of the last 10,000 years. The projectiles arrived without warning. Ships that had conquered entire species simply ceased to exist as tungsten penetrators. Moving at 75,000 kilometers per second, converted their mass to expanding clouds of plasma. The cascade effects were even more devastating than at New Ancora. As debris from destroyed vessels impacted other ships at relativistic velocities, in less than 4 minutes, the greatest military force in galactic history was reduced to an expanding debris field. The few surviving vessels, their crews stunned by the incomprehensible destruction, broadcast surrender signals on all frequencies. High Chancellor Vex, watching the tactical displays from his flagship at the edge of the combat zone, finally understood what Dr. Zeraprime had been trying to tell them. The humans hadn't developed weapons. They had weaponized the fundamental forces of the universe. Open a communication channel to the human leadership, Vex ordered, his voice carrying none of its previous arrogance. We need to discuss terms for a ceasefire. Admiral Morrison's image appeared on the alien flagship's main display, his expression professional but implacable. High Chancellor, humanity is prepared to discuss peaceful coexistence, but any future aggression against human colonies or citizens will be met with the full force of Newton's laws of motion. Admiral Vex replied carefully, we propose immediate recognition of human sovereign space and full membership in the Galactic Trade Federation. Our species have much to learn from your practical approach to physics. 3 months later, the Galactic Trade Federation's charter was amended to include humanity as a full member with equal voting rights. The new treaty established the Kinetic Weapons Limitation Accord, which paradoxically strengthened human security by acknowledging their technological supremacy in that field. Commander Elena Vasquez, now promoted to Admiral and serving as humanity's representative to the Federation Military Council, found herself in the same crystalline chamber where aliens had once laughed at human primitive weapons. The humans raise an interesting point about defensive doctrine. She addressed the assembled delegates. Energy shields are excellent protection against energy weapons. But in space, there's no such thing as purely defensive technology. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Dr. Zara Prime, now humanity's colleague rather than dismissive observer, added her scientific perspective. The lesson of the human conflict is that technological advancement doesn't always follow predictable paths. Sometimes, perfecting the basics is more effective than pursuing exotic innovations. As the council session concluded, Alina reflected on the journey from New Ankara to this moment. Humanity had earned its place in galactic civilization not by matching alien technology, but by understanding the universe's fundamental rules better than anyone else. The galaxy had learned to respect physics. More importantly, they had learned to respect the species that had made those physics into the deadliest force among the stars. Outside the Federation station's viewports, human ships moved in formation, with vessels from dozens of alien species, all part of a civilization that now understood that in space, Sir Isaac Newton remained the ultimate authority.